The most famous clue in one of America's oldest mysteries is usually presented as if it made the story stranger. It may do the opposite. Croatoan was not a curse, a supernatural warning, or a meaningless word left by people in panic. It named a real place and a real indigenous community known to the colonists. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of destination message they had agreed to leave if they moved before help returned. The Lost Colony did not vanish without a clue. The mystery is what happened after the clue was written. This episode does not claim that the word solves Roanoke. It tests a narrower idea, whether the abandoned settlement looks more like a sudden disappearance or a planned relocation, and why even the strongest archaeological leads still stop short of identifying the fate of every colonist. In 1587, 118 men, women, and children crossed the Atlantic in an attempt to establish a permanent English colony. They were led by John White. Roanoke Island was not supposed to be their final destination. The plan was to continue north toward Chesapeake Bay, where the English expected better conditions for settlement. But the expedition's captain refused to carry them farther up the coast. The colonists were left at Roanoke, a place already marked by the failure and violence of an earlier English expedition. The settlement began under pressure. Relations with nearby Algonquian communities had already been damaged, and the new colonists made the situation worse when an English party attacked a Croatoan settlement after mistaking it for an enemy village. Food was uncertain. Winter was approaching. One hopeful event survived in the record: the birth of Virginia Dare, John White's granddaughter. But a birth did not solve the colony's supply problem. The colonists urged White to return to England and bring back help. Before he left, they discussed what would happen if Roanoke became impossible to hold. The colony would not necessarily remain together. According to the National Park Service account, the colonists planned to divide, with one group staying near Roanoke and another moving inland in search of a more secure settlement and supplies. They also agreed to leave a written destination if they moved before White returned. A North Carolina State Historical Summary adds another part of the agreement. A Maltese cross would mark the message if the move had been forced. That agreement changes the meaning of the scene White later found. A carved place name was not an improvised riddle. It was part of the evacuation plan. White expected to return quickly. Instead, England's war with Spain pulled ships, crews, and money away from Roanoke. The Spanish Armada delayed the supply expedition. An attempted return in 1588 failed after privateers took the supplies. White finally secured passage with another voyage in 1590, nearly 3 years after he had left his family and the colony behind. On August 18, 1590, White reached Roanoke Island. The landing itself was dangerous, and mariners had already drowned in the attempt. At the settlement, he found no colonists. He found CRO cut into a tree and Croatoan carved into a palisade post. He did not report bodies, graves, or signs of a battle. He did not describe houses shattered by a sudden storm. The buildings appeared to have been taken down, and the agreed distress cross was not there. This is the central reversal in the Roanoke story. An empty settlement feels like evidence of disappearance. A dismantled settlement with a planned destination message looks like evidence of departure. It does not prove that the departure ended safely. It does show that the phrase vanished without a trace removes the most important trace from the story. White believed the message pointed south to Croatoan, now associated with Hatteras Island. He immediately tried to sail there, but bad weather and maritime losses broke the search before he could complete it. He returned to England without reaching the place named in the message and never confirmed whether the colonists were there. That failed trip created a 400-year gap between clue and answer. Croatoan was both a place and the name of an indigenous community. The colonists knew people from that community. Manto, a Croatoan man who had traveled with the English, had served as an interpreter and intermediary. The carved word therefore pointed toward a known human geography, not an unknown supernatural force, but recognition is not confirmation. Archaeological work on Hatteras Island has recovered European objects from the Broad period. Those finds matter because they are consistent with English contact. They do not automatically identify the 118 colonists. English expeditions had visited the region before. European goods moved through trade. Later contact could leave similar material. No graveyard, building complex, or settlement layer has been definitively connected to the complete lost colony. Another line of investigation looks west rather than south. John White's regional map contains a patch over a fort-like symbol near the Albemarle Sound. Archaeologists searching in that area have found English period objects and possible structural traces. The inland route also fits the earlier plan to move part of the colony away from Roanoke, but the same evidentiary problem remains. Objects can move through trade, and possible structures can belong to later colonial activity. No discovery at the inland site has definitively established a settlement of the 1,587 colonists. The two leading locations do not have to exclude each other. The colonists had discussed splitting into groups before White left. Some may have moved toward Croatoan, others inland, and some may have remained near Roanoke for a time. That is a plausible reconstruction, not a proven itinerary. The surviving evidence cannot tell us that all 118 people made one journey together. What about a sudden catastrophe? The Outer Banks are vulnerable to hurricanes, and severe weather could have damaged crops, boats, or supplies. Famine and disease were real threats. Spain was actively searching for English settlements. Conflict with local communities was also possible after English violence had damaged relations. These dangers may have shaped individual deaths and decisions, but none fits the abandoned site as a complete explanation without additional evidence. White described buildings that had been dismantled, not flattened. He reported no graves from an epidemic, no battle scene, and no sign of a Spanish attack. Absence is not proof. A storm can leave little evidence after 3 years. Graves can be elsewhere. A violent event could occur after a peaceful relocation. The responsible conclusion is not that catastrophe was impossible. It is that the scene White found most directly supports an organized move before it supports instant destruction. Later reports added more possibilities. English settlers at Jamestown heard stories that earlier colonists had lived inland or had been killed. A Mercer University profile of participating archaeologists also describes a split-group hypothesis in which disease, conflict, or integration produced different outcomes. These claims were recorded or proposed long after the colony moved. They can guide questions. They cannot identify every person or establish one final event. This is why a single artifact cannot finish the story. An object has to be connected to a secure date, a location, and a human context. A piece of English pottery can show contact. It cannot, by itself, tell us whether it belonged to a Roanoke colonist, arrived through trade, or was deposited later. A carved destination can show intent. It cannot prove arrival. The strongest version of the Roanoke story is therefore less supernatural and more human. A vulnerable colony was placed in the wrong location. Its residents expected White to return with supplies. When he did not, they followed a plan to move and left a message naming at least one destination. They may have divided into smaller groups because feeding and protecting 118 people together was difficult. Some may have reached Croatoan. Some may have moved inland. Disease, hunger, conflict, storms, and assimilation could then have produced different outcomes for different people. But may have is the boundary. No selected source proves a massacre, a supernatural disappearance, or one complete fate for the colony. No archaeological site yet accounts for every colonist. No record confirms that all of them reached the place carved on the palisade. So what does Croatoan actually prove? It proves that the famous mystery did not begin with people evaporating from a settlement. It began with people facing a supply crisis, preparing to relocate, and leaving the kind of message they had promised to leave. The word turns an impossible disappearance into an incomplete migration record. Our Roanoke remains unsolved because the next page is missing. We know the colonists planned to move. We know the settlement was dismantled. We know the direction at least one message pointed. What we do not know is who followed that direction, who chose another route, and how long any group survived after leaving the island. The clue did not make the story mysterious. The failure to follow it did.